When I made my review of Brendan Schaub's The Gringo Poppy, I said it was one of the worst things I had ever seen. But the keener-eared among you might have noticed that I didn't say it was the worst comedy special I've ever seen. There was a good reason for that. A worse special exists. One that combines the worst aspects of every other terrible comedy special I've watched as part of this channel. An interminably long, awkward, unfunny, and incomprehensible display of self-indulgence that has largely managed to fly under the radar of aficionados of douche-chill comedy. Of course, I am talking about the subject of this video, Jeff Foxworthy's recent Netflix special, The Good Old Days. At this point, you may be wondering what could be so bad about this special that it would outrank the likes of Schumer, D'Elia, and Schaub. The answer is, The Good Old Days is the stand-up comedy equivalent of cosmic horror. This is an eldritch creation, taken straight from the works of H.P. Lovecraft. The more one thinks about the good old days, the more confounding it becomes. Eventually, you're left a gibbering, raving wretch whose sanity has been stripped away until they surrender to the comforting embrace of madness. Okay, that might be hyperbolic, but only a little. There is something off about Jeff, though. He doesn't look like he's aged a day in the last 20 years, as if he's some kind of hillbilly Dracula. Or maybe he's a clone. There has to be some explanation for the total lack of confidence he shows when telling jokes.
I had no idea my breath was that bad. Has a cow pooped in a gut pile? What is that?
This joke isn't a lone incident either. But before I get ahead of myself, it's worth spending a few minutes talking about the opening of this special. When Jeff initially comes out, we get one of the only wide shots of the crowd. And that is probably for good reason, because even though about half of the shot is obscured by the title graphic, you can clearly see that the upper floor of the theater is empty. Just file that away in the back of your mind for later because it will be important. Jeff opens up by saying that he doesn't want to talk about COVID, then starts talking about COVID, because apparently every comedian is legally obligated to use the middling material they scraped together over the last 2 years. The majority of Jeff's COVID material is complaining about his wife talking too much.
I am not qualified to meet all of my wife's conversational needs. It takes a village, as they say.
And here I have to offer an apology to Brendan Schaub. B, I thought you had the worst material about spending time with your wife during lockdown, but I was wrong. So very, very wrong. Jeff imitates his wife in a monologue that would make George Carlin's Modern Man bit seem laconic by comparison.
Have you put any thought of where we're going to go when this pandemic is over? Because I've got to get out of this house. There's another light out of this house in the kitchen, and I keep cooking that is so wrong. Oh my God! I just saw my butt in the mirror. Why didn't you say something to me? Lamps off Robin told me she can't find toilet paper. Oh my God! What if Kyle was gay and he hadn't come out of the closet? Hey, say a little prayer for Chip and Jennifer's grandson. Speaking of 30%, he's too far down the road. It's become such a needy Judy, I don't even want to talk to him. Why are you making a noose?
I get what he's doing by trying to illustrate how annoying his wife is, but there comes a point where you cross over the line from being ironically annoying for comedic effect to actually being annoying. Jeff doesn't just cross that line, he launches himself over it like Evel Knievel trying to jump the Snake River Canyon. This shit goes on for 3 whole minutes, as the meager laughs he was getting to begin with dry up like a trickle of piss in Death Valley. Now we're 5 minutes in, and even though Jeff didn't want to talk about COVID, he still is. He says some good stuff happened during COVID too. He became a grandfather.
My daughter, I don't know how she pulled this off. She arranged to be able to get on the Jerry Springer show, and we were able to find out who the father is without spending one dime of our own money.
Nice 30-year-old reference. And why is it delivered with the confidence of a millennial making a phone call? If you enjoyed that bit of generational cell phone-based humor, this special will be a barrel of laughs for you. Because next up, Jeff talks about having to teach his mom to use a smartphone after her jitterbug flip phone broke. Did you know that old people have trouble texting? Did you know they don't understand what LOL means?
I called her up and said, Mom, what did you just text me? I said, if you go to the grocery store, I need some ketchup.
The cell phone humor is interrupted when Jeff starts talking about his mom wanting to get her a carry permit, and he makes a strange comment about Ron White.
Her eyesight is bad, her hearing is worse, and she has the balance of Ron White after midnight.
Maybe I'm just misreading it, but that seems like an odd remark to make given how Ron has been sober for over a year now. Whether it was intended as an insult, a friendly jab, or just a bit of shameless name-dropping for cheap applause, it isn't funny, and the joke was delivered about as well as a stillbirth. And yet, it's not even the most cringeworthy or confusing joke in this small segment of the special. There is this bit where Jeff is pretending to be his mom on a commercial for arthritis medication that lets her load her gun.
But thanks to new improved buffering, I can make it rain, dog. You feel me, bruh?
But the winner goes to the joke Jeff tells about getting his mom's husband a bulletproof vest in case...
Just in case she goes spider monkey during the Wheel of Fortune.
What does it mean, Jeff? We're barely 10 minutes into this shit, and it's already making me angry. Unfortunately, we're only just getting started. After Jeff tells a terrible story about watching his father-in-law wash his entire car with a gas station squeegee, we get the first utterance of the good old days.
He just talks about how the world has gone to hell in a hay wagon and it used to be so much better back in the good old days.
This begins the portion of the special that I'm dubbing sundowning comedy, because it's a 20-minute block of elderly dementia patient rambling about the past, all centered around the phrase, back in the good old days. Jeff seems to be trying to use this as a new catchphrase, in the vein of, you might be a redneck, but there are a few problems. For one, Jeff only uses this phrase for about a 20-minute span in the middle of the special, so it comes out of nowhere and then is dropped abruptly after he's done with it, making the phrase seem forced and unnatural. This isn't helped by the fact that while you might be a redneck was a punchline, Jeff uses back in the good old days as a setup for whatever tepid, do you remember this thing joke he's about to tell. And he says the entire phrase every single time.
Because back in the good old days, back in the good old days, when I was growing up back in the good old days, 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 back in the good old days.
Every time he says back in the good old days, it's like a dagger made of pure concentrated cringe stabbing you in the brainstem. It caused me physical pain because it gets to the point after the 10th or so time you've heard him say it that your body starts tensing up in anticipation like somebody's about to dump ice water on you. The worst part about this awful forced catchphrase is that it's in service of stale and predictable bits reminiscing about what it was like growing up. Jeff actually does a joke about kids having to earn trophies when he was young.
And it was weird back then, because if you wanted a trophy, you had to finish in first place.
What is this, 2007? Who gives a shit about participation trophies anymore? Honestly, most of this shit is just boomer rambling about shit like playing outside as a kid. The kind of shit you'd read on an elderly family member's Facebook page, but even less interesting. Also, like an elderly relative's Facebook posts, there is some genuinely weird shit mixed in here. The only laugh I got out of this special was ironic, and it came when Jeff was reminiscing about the treasure chest at the doctor's office.
Does anybody remember the treasure chest? Why did that have to stop?
If one of your parents said something like this to you, you'd check to see if they mixed up their fucking medication. But this is the level we're at with this special. Jeff complains about child safety and car seats before taking a trip down memory lane about clubhouses. Can you guess what his childhood clubhouse password was? It's a real brain buster.
Boobies.
At this point, Jeff just talks about boobs for a while, including an anecdote about a friend who is probably in prison now.
One of my friends, I think he's in prison now, had a theory that if heaven was a perfect place, it would just be a giant field of naked boobies and that they'd let you take your shoes off and run around for a little while.
I think this was actually a scene that was cut from the movie The Cell. After rambling some more about school and sex education, Jeff gets around to his very timely material on smartphones.
See, back in the good old days, my entire family had one phone. We had the avocado green, and my parents actually sprung for the extra long cord.
This may come as a surprise to my Zoomer viewers who came out of their mother's cunt doing a Fortnite dance with an iPhone in their hands, but those didn't always exist. See, back in the good old days, all we had was a landline that was hardwired into the kitchen wall. Well, unless you were a certain Long Island family, in which case it would frequently come unhardwired from the wall while you cried and said you had a stomachache.
I saw a movie in school and I need help.
Hey, do you guys remember the worst part about those old school phone cables? Because Jeff does.
Remember the downside of the extra long cord? Anybody remember? Yeah, it was always tangled up, like Aunt Judy's thong after kickboxing lessons.
During this segment, Jeff makes every trite observation about smartphones that comedians were making in 2009. They replaced cameras, so now young people take pictures of their food. GPS replaced old paper maps. Bonus points for not only making a joke about how maps are difficult to fold back into place, but also making a dads don't like asking for directions joke.
Instead of going to Disney World, we're all just going to go in this hardware store and have a look around. How about that?
There are some basic jokes about Googling medical conditions, and of course the fact that you can watch porn. And it's all the most cornball, milquetoast observations that comedians were making literally over a decade ago.
Back in the good old days, you got excited when the phone rang.
This is without even getting into the several minutes Jeff devotes to talking about fucking butt dialing.
If somebody butt dials me and I don't have anything to do, I'll stay on for like 20 minutes. I'm like,
do you really listen to butt dials for 30 minutes, Jeff? After a drawn-out joke about sending dick pics that has no payoff, this is basically the end of Jeff's The Good Old Days material. He packs it up and with no transition begins talking about traveling with his wife.
Because it takes my wife longer than 10 seconds to pack. Because she has outfits.
This is by far the worst part of the special, and it has literally the worst joke I've ever heard when Jeff is talking about his wife packing her jewelry.
If you watch court TV, that's what they call the jewelry selection process. Jewelry selection process.
Jewelry selection process.
Jeff goes over every aspect of his wife's packing habits in excruciating detail that is neither funny nor even mildly interesting.
So now my wife never packs a suitcase without packing a hair dryer. But she also packs a hair curler and a hair straightener. Then she will pack that lighted makeup mirror, her rooting through my suitcase. She pulled out a 5-pound bag of oats. She goes, "What is this for?" That is just in case the 2 donkeys we're going to need to carry your luggage get hungry while we're gone.
And he goes on about it for 10 fucking minutes. This is where comedy goes to die.
And my wife will never have to go to the bathroom until we've just passed an exit.
It's like the Dust Bowl of humor. All of the topsoil has been stripped away, and we're left with vast swaths of barren land where nary a chortle can be eked out of the unforgiving ground.
And ladies, you could do this. Yes, you could change it from the right front to the right rear tire.
Jeff is like an old-timey con man giving a speech about snake oil, and while you're distracted, his cohorts are quietly pickpocketing you. Except in this scenario, what's being pickpocketed from you are precious minutes of your life that you will never get back. Assuming you've made it through this part of the special without gouging your own eyes out or deafening yourself to avoid bearing witness to the horrors wrought by an uncaring God, you'll make it to Jeff's closing bit. This is another painfully drawn out and brutally unfunny story about an incident that took place after a show Jeff did with Larry the Cable Guy. I'll summarize because this story drags on for 12 minutes with barely a single funny line. The long story short here is that after doing a show with Larry on a particularly hot day, Jeff didn't want to go out to eat and instead wanted to go back to his hotel room and sleep.
And I said, "Dude," I said, "I got too hot tonight. I'm not hungry."
Larry responded that he can't wait until Jeff needs something from him. Cue wacky story that definitely happened. In the middle of the night, Jeff gets up to go pee, but accidentally walks into the hallway by mistake and locks himself out of the room. Oh, and he's naked because wacky.
Like Matt Damon in The Martian, solve the problem, solve the problem.
What follows is Jeff slinking around the hotel like a redneck Sly Cooper, peeing in empty beer cans he found in the stairwell.
And I'm not proud of this, but I picked those beer cans up and I peed in them.
And covering up his nudity with a couple of pizza boxes he found. Eventually, he makes his way down to the front desk where he asks the receptionist for another key to his room. She asks for his ID and Jeff says,
I said, "I do, but it's in my other pizza box."
At that moment, Larry walks into the lobby and pretends he doesn't know who Jeff is because...
He goes, "I cannot wait until you ask me to do something for you."
Everything works out though because the hotel security guard is a fan and recognizes them both. Jeff gets back into his hotel room, and to make amends with Larry, he offers him a beer.
I said, well, just to prove I don't have any hard feelings, I went and got you a beer.
Get it? 'Cause he peed in those beer cans from earlier? The Good Old Days is, by a wide margin, the worst stand-up special I've ever seen. Don't get me wrong, the bar was not set especially high for Jeff Foxworthy, but he still managed to limbo under it with this dismal performance. This was the first time that I've watched a special and not laughed a single time unironically. Even giant steaming piles of shit like the Leather Special and Gringo Poppy have gotten a laugh or two out of me. But this special was something else. Something unfunny on a level that is hard to put into words.
And the only hoe you were playing with was the one to get the weeds out of the tomatoes.
Aside from the COVID stuff, every bit was dated and cliched. This was Jeff's first solo special in 24 years, and it feels like he was recycling bits that he had written in the 90s. The freshest material were the smartphone bits, and they were still observations comedians were making over a decade ago. It's so safe too, with the exception of Jeff's weird references like Aunt Judy's thong after kickboxing lessons, or the bizarre ramblings that sound like something you'd hear murmured in the halls of a nursing home. There isn't an original bit on this special. The Good Old Days is basically an hour of warmed over boomer observations that the world has changed, mixed with absolutely dreary jokes complaining about how annoying his wife is. It makes me wonder who this special was intended for. It can't be aimed at Jeff's audience from blue-collar comedy. There isn't even a hint of that material here. That might be the weirdest part of it all to me. If this was your first interaction with Jeff Foxworthy, you would never guess that he had spent the last quarter of a century telling jokes about being a redneck. Maybe he wanted to move away from that kind of comedy with this solo endeavor, but what did that leave him with? If you read the handful of reviews from this special on IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes, it's mostly people who were fans of Jeff saying that this special was boring and cliched. So again, who was this intended for? The only target audience I can think of would be people even older than Jeff. Like literally elderly people. Maybe that's why it's so bland, so the blue hairs don't have a coronary with any racy material. That's the only answer I can think of. This special also has some of the most atrocious canned laughter I've ever heard.
Kind of a kickstand deal there. I remember thinking right then and there, I'm going to church.
I typed in delicious Italian near me. I'm like, Mamma mia. That's a spicy meatball there.
At one point, you can hear somebody in the audience fucking cough, and it echoes through the half-empty theater over the laugh track fading out. I think they even added fake applause too, because there is a moment about 4 minutes and 50 seconds in where they cut to the crowd while people are supposedly clapping, and it doesn't look like more than a handful of people at best are. Now, I can't say for certain what was fake laughter, what was real, or what may have been enhanced a bit, but none of it sounds right to me. And it would actually go a long way to explaining why Jeff seemed so unsure of himself, despite being such an experienced comic. Either way, I cannot accept that anyone would genuinely laugh that hard at any joke from this special. My brain just refuses to believe it's possible. Overall, The Good Old Days is terrible. It's an atrocity committed against comedy with zero redeeming qualities. Beyond simply not being funny, it brings nothing to the table. Say what you want about Brendan Schaub, but at least over the course of 24 minutes, he occasionally came up with something weird or interesting in its own way. On The Good Old Days, Jeff Foxworthy has nothing to say that hasn't already been said countless times before. When I reviewed the Gringo Poppy, I said that it was something so bad that it forces you to recalibrate the scale you use to judge other comedy. The Good Old Days is so bad that it's completely off the scale. There is no metric by which to judge it. I can't properly explain to you how bad it is. This is something you have to experience for yourself, and I encourage you to do so. Go witness this fucking disaster and spread the word of its existence. People need to know about it. Before I end the review, I'll leave you with one final thought. During the special, Jeff says that he is blessed.
I'm such a blessed man because I have gotten to do this for a long, long time.
And I think he's right. Divine intervention is the only explanation for this special in my mind, but not the God of Christianity or any other god of this world. Jeff Foxworthy has been blessed by the unutterable gods of realms beyond all mortal ken or comprehension. He is their avatar. He is the dark jester leading our damned souls into the seething madness of the void. As always, I want to thank you for watching the video as well as liking, commenting, and subscribing. And a special thank you to my supporters on Patreon who help make these videos possible. Thank you. Iron Shamrock, Jokes in My Pants, Ryan Williamson, Fightback CBD, Ryan Cedor, Mike Roballs, Timothy Lee Peterson, Julius Caesar Has Jungle Fever, Tracksuit, Red at 78 Fiat, Jackson, Firebrand, Jack Trey Bulls, Sneps, I Said No Cops, Paulo Gomez, Alex, Kyle, Hassan Jokai, Jambi Helmick, Neem, and Kevin Howard.